Tammy disregarded my words. Just as I returned to my car after settling the bill, I handed the manager my room key. However, he paid no attention. Instead, he rose, walked to the wall, and flicked a switch, casting a red glow. I glanced back, half expecting a police flashlight, only to realize he'd activated the flashing vacancy sign. Our room seemed to be the last available, and now, having completed our stay, the manager aimed to rent it out again that night. He then dialed a number, paused, and spoke urgently into the phone. Only after did he return with my bill. After settling up and heading to my car, I noticed the maid's cart already stationed by the open door of our room where Tammy and I had spent the past hour. Slipping into the driver's seat, I thanked Tammy for the enjoyable time and expressed my satisfaction with her. As usual, she remained absorbed in her phone, oblivious to my words. The journey back to the motel mirrored our prior interactions. It seemed our bonding time was merely a brief diversion from her incessant texting. Though I attempted sincerity, my gratitude was feigned. Yet, I felt content and relaxed. She knew how to satisfy my desires, and in return, I provided her with pleasurable moments. Our relationship boiled down to little more than that. As I finished expressing my gratitude with a nonchalant air, I noticed another car swiftly entering the parking lot nearby. Despite the darkness due to most lights being out, I had parked discreetly, making it hard to discern my car's color or license plates. The newcomer parked directly in front of the office, illuminated by bright white lights and a flashing red vacancy sign. A man emerged, rushing into the office. Meanwhile, as I fumbled with my keys, the man exited the office, checking in almost as swiftly as I had. His companion, a woman, hurried from the car, scanning her surroundings anxiously. Her behavior reminded me of when I first met Tammy. I too had been apprehensive about being seen. Tammy, however, was solely focused on avenging her unfaithful husband. I slouched in my seat, observing the woman cautiously. Even though I was concealed in darkness, caution seemed prudent. Stepping into the illuminated area, the vacancy sign cast a vivid red light on her worried face. My heart skipped a beat. It was Helen. Within moments, they reached the room door, the maid having already departed. My wife entered, the door shutting behind them. My initial urge was to leap from the car, burst through the door, confront the man, and forcibly retrieve Helen. Yet, I composed myself, taking a deep breath, glancing at Tammy. I hoped she had noticed something, but she remained absorbed in her phone. As my panic subsided, a new fear gripped me, my throat tightening as if someone were strangling me. These visceral reactions stemmed from the realization that I could prevent Helen from cheating, but at the cost of destroying our marriage. Starting the car, I acknowledged my lack of trust in myself. Staying put posed the risk of irreversible actions. Hastily, I drove to the mall where Tammy had parked. Keeping my distance, I watched as she sensed our stationary state, looked up, and then exited the car. Bye, she uttered before vanishing from sight. Alone in the parking lot, I screamed, overwhelmed by emotion, tears streaming down my face. I pounded the steering wheel until my hand throbbed, tempted to strike my head to silence the chaotic thoughts swirling in my mind. It's unclear how much time passed before I regained composure. Unchecked, I didn't check my watch, but one question had been answered. The maid hadn't changed the bedding, merely draping it over the top. By now, Helen would be enveloped in the stale sweat Tammy and I had left behind. The thought choked me with disgust. I compelled myself to banish that image and consider my options. What were they? I could head home right away, settle with Mrs. Reynolds, and send her off. Or perhaps I'd indulge in a few drinks before Helen returned. With my car in the garage, she'd have time to craft her tale upon spotting it. I could already guess the gist. She needed something from the mall. I pondered if it was the same one I had parked near. Should I roam around, locate her car, and wait? Helen's a meticulous planner, akin to myself. Odds are, she's pre-purchased her items and stashed them in her trunk. Later, when he drops her at the mall, she'll enter with her bag, mingle a bit to establish an alibi, then head to her car. If I stumbled upon her vehicle, catching her off guard, that's what I'd witness. Her reaction upon arriving home would be one of surprise since I'd informed her I'd be working late and wouldn't visit until she was asleep. I mused over whether she'd attempted to contact me at the office before departing. It hardly mattered, my tracks were covered. If my phone defaulted to voicemail, she'd assume I was tied up with a client. Following my rendezvous with Tammy, I always returned to the office, toil away for a while solo, await Helen's bedtime notice, then depart straight for home. No need for an office return tonight. I doubted Helen would ring me from the motel. What should I say when she arrives? Should I attempt to throw her off? Maybe I'll begin by questioning her purchases, probing if she visited the mall where my sister works. Would she appear tired and sweaty? Not likely, she'd likely freshen up for Mrs. Reynolds. But what if I looked into her eyes? What would I find? But then I realized such a scenario would never unfold. I never inquired about her shopping trips. Perhaps I could slip in a single question, but any more, and Helen would grow suspicious. The thought of the ensuing confrontation sent shivers down my spine. What started with my interrogation would inevitably lead to hers. She wouldn't rest until she pried my thoughts loose. I'd try to stay silent, but it'd always end the same. She'd coerce me into divulging everything. She'd confess, offering justifications for her deceit, none of which would suffice. Revenge might have been a valid motive, but it wasn't the case. If she knew I was at the motel seeking retribution, she'd approach my car hand in hand with another man, then give me a defiant gesture before entering the room. Should I attempt to breach the door, she'd alert the authorities and leave me to spend the night in a cell. No, she remained oblivious to my presence. Her motive was solely personal. Why wasn't I sufficient for her? She never conveyed dissatisfaction in bed. If she desired something specific, she'd articulate it. Such instances were rare. Typically, Helen exuded optimism and wore a constant smile. I racked my brain for signs of her discontent. Then it struck me, a month prior, she queried if I found her dull. I vehemently reassured her, declaring her the most thrilling aspect of my life. Yet, it hit me like a bolt of lightning. Her inquiry stemmed not from resentment but disappointment. How often had she felt let down? I recalled a few instances, but there were likely more. She'd been in high spirits while I was weary. Though she never faulted me outright, her disappointment lingered. She once remarked on my previous demands for affection, now seemingly reversed. I refuted this, insisting my desire for her remained fervent. Yet, she sensed a shift. I maintained my usual routines: work, family, household chores. But now, an additional concern loomed: Tammy. It hadn't crossed my mind before, but my sexual activity hadn't diminished. If anything, it had increased with 2 women involved. Thus, one of them faced rejection, frustration, and self-doubt. Despite her ageless allure, Helen, like any woman, felt vulnerable. With my decreased attentiveness, she likely questioned her appeal, rendering her susceptible to unwanted advances. Once she resolved to yield to him, she likely made arrangements. Perhaps she devised a shopping trip at the mall or concocted a more intricate plan. Aware of Mrs. Reynolds' limited clientele and availability, she'd have plotted accordingly. Like Tammy, she might have scoured obscure motels for affordability and secrecy, ensuring a seamless transition from one to another until securing a spot. With her preparations complete, Helen awaited my next late-night call, which happened this evening. Following our conversation, she contacted her paramour and then Mrs. Reynolds. Confident she'd return home long before me, she likely had contingencies in place, unprepared for the possibility of our paths intersecting. Little did she anticipate my departure from the motel coinciding with their check-in. How could she have foreseen her deceitful husband's decision to aid Tammy's revenge, veering towards her due to perceived differences? Tammy wasn't inherently superior in looks or lovemaking. I harbored no special sentiments for her. My affair lacked justification, a realization dawning belatedly. If I encountered Helen upon my return, tears would flow, confessions exchanged. We'd grant forgiveness, pledging fidelity henceforth, though unhappiness would linger until our children left for college. It would be agonizing for Helen, but my current thoughts were self-centered. I'd be shattered. Yet, why did I ponder only my betrayal? Hadn't she cheated too? We were ostensibly even, yet the scales didn't quite balance. I'd face a double blow. The memory of Helen darting nervously across the parking lot, heading to the same bed Tammy and I had just vacated, would haunt me. Yet, there was something far worse, the absence of her usual gaze. Her eyes, brimming with admiration and affection, always warmed me. They affirmed my existence as her cherished partner, a feeling that filled me with gratitude each Sunday. Once she learned of my actions, those eyes would no longer regard me as special, the best husband, father, and lover, as she often praised. She might maintain a facade for our family and friends, yet in moments of exhaustion, her guard would falter, revealing the anguish of shattered trust. Hence, upon our children's departure, I'd have to part ways. Unable to face those eyes daily, the loss of her unwavering adoration would be unbearable. I'd taken her reverence for granted, and with each glance revealing my folly, it'd feel like a dagger to the heart. No, it doesn't have to end like that. She'll remain unaware of my actions and knowledge. Her life will improve, regardless of the money I sacrifice. I'll be home for dinner every night from now on, putting business trips behind me. We don't need the extra income that much. I'll stick to her closely, ensuring she never contemplates leaving again. Our intimacy will increase, with me striving to exceed her satisfaction each month. We'll explore new experiences together. One evening, we'll compile wish lists and collaborate on them. Our bond will shine through. I briefly pondered if Helen would regret her indiscretion, enjoying a charmed life with a seemingly faithful husband and our wonderful children. Likely not, if she's like me. When I was with Tammy, Helen rarely crossed my mind, ignorance spared her pain. She'll likely adopt a similar mindset, seeing me as her loyal spouse. Since it was a one-time occurrence, it holds no significance. If she feels remorse, she'll make amends over time. Eventually, it'll fade from her memory entirely, but not from mine. I know I'll never forget the night she entered the room after me, no matter how hard I try to push it aside. I hope you enjoyed this story. Please subscribe to the channel for new stories.